Welcome. Today we're going to be covering the Guide to Computer Forensics Investigations. This is the 6th edition. The material all comes from Cengage. They own and control all copyright material. I'm just providing video lectures on the individual chapters for my courses using this textbook. My name is Arthur Salmon, and I'm going to be working with you throughout this book. Thank you. Chapter 11 is about email and social media investigations. Again, this is the lecture review. We have lab videos walking us through some of the actions. So this video series is just specifically keeping on point with core concepts. So the main objectives of this lecture is explain the role of email investigation, describe the client-server role specifically as it relates to email, describe the tasks, explain the use of server logs, describe some specialized email forensics tools, and explain how to apply digital forensics methods to investigate email and other social media communications. So what role does email have in a digital forensics investigation? Well, email is one of the primary forms of communication as it relates to digital technology. It is definitely slowly being replaced by other forms like instant messaging or texting via mobile forensics, but email is definitely still out there. Also, email scams and fraud attempts are only growing, and normally email fraud is done through either phishing or spoofing attempts. So the investigator will need to know how to examine and interpret the unique contents of emails. So a phishing email contains a link to a web page. It normally is in the form of an emergency, and it prompts the user to, hey, your password expires. Click here to renew your password. Or your account is compromised. Click here to update your password, and it provides you a link. That way, clicking on the link allows the download of either malicious content, or it takes you to a fake website for you to enter your old credentials and then update your credentials so that they could capture those credentials, username and password. We also have what's called farming, and this is where DNS poisoning takes users to fake websites where you think it's wellsfargo.com, but in reality it's Fargo or US banks or usbank.com instead of US Bank or some variation. Again, the more notable email scams are like the Nigerian scam or the New York Lottery. My favorite is, if you've never played the New York Lottery, how could you win the New York Lottery? But that's a very common scam that a lot of people end up falling for. Other forms are spoofing, and this is where an email can be used to commit fraud. So a spoofed email looks like a legitimate email coming from legitimate, and in reality, it's not, it's fake. So the investigator can use the Enhanced Extended Simple Mail Transfer Protocol, ESMTP, in the number of messages to look at the header to check for the legitimacy of the email. And again, this core is looking at email investigations, but again, this is a specialty when we're dealing with digital forensics. So some of this nuance isn't going to be known unless you've done email investigations. So if you're looking at these terms going, I don't know what those are, again, this is an overview. In later videos, we will actually be diving deeper into like internet-based forensics, social media-based forensics, and that will be email, social media, and other things like that. So how can emails be sent? Emails can be sent over a intranet or internet. Oftentimes, email is sent over the internet, the World Wide Web, Gmail, Office 365. Those are going to be email environments. There is a client-server type structure. You have your client, what you're using, the application to actually send the email, and we have the server side, which is actually going to be the device that will be receiving your request and then processing it. There are things like account protection, normally done through username and password, or other forms of multi-factor. Might be a one-time password, OTP, might be a multi-factor text message to your mobile phone or through an authenticator, or other forms of protection. Again, this is just overview of email. It's not a in-depth review. So let's examine this a little bit more in depth. So we have our email, we have our client. That could be also where our inbox is. So this is where the user is going to be. Either a desktop client, could be a web app to access their inbox. They will open up an email and they will send it. They get sent to the email server, and that's for sending an email. To receive an email, again, user will open up their desktop or web app application. It will reach out and ask, do you have an email for me? And if yes, it will download it. So we can download it of one of two ways. POP3 or IMAP. There are distinct differences, and we're going to get into those a little bit later. But the big thing here is when we retrieve the email, do we keep a copy on the server, or do we move it to our local device? And if we have multiple devices calling out to that email server, we may want to leave a copy on the server. That way, if you connect with your tablet or your desktop or your laptop or your phone, all of them can keep retrieving those copies, as opposed to if you check it on your tablet and it doesn't leave a copy, then all of the emails are now on your tablet. You log into your desktop or your phone and those emails aren't there. So there is a necessary structure on how we're going to organize and set up our email servers, as well as how we're going to call to check for emails. Again, either through POP or IMAP. So what are some pieces of information that have to be there? Well, we have to have a naming convention. And normally this is set up by the organization, depending if it's a private or public organization. If it's a corporation, they may have first name dot last name, first initial, last name, first name, last initial. It really just depends. If it's a public, it could be something at Gmail, or Joe at Gmail or Hotmail or Yahoo or any of the other major public domains. Anything after the @ sign, this is the domain. Anything after the @. And sometimes it might be a subdomain, because it could be student.csn.edu. Well, csn.edu is the primary domain, but this account has subdomains that have emails, and that's used for organization. So tracing corporate emails are typically a little easier because the accounts are standardized. Public emails, not necessarily, because public emails, you don't have to have identity verification. You don't have to have your driver's license checked or your name or those specific details put in. Where normally with corporate emails, you have a much more strenuous intake process to verify identity and whatnot. So many companies are migrating their emails to the cloud, whether it be a hosted exchange through Office 365 or through other online email platforms like Gmail. Keep in mind that businesses have Gmail as well, and it could be at company.com, but it really is using a Gmail backend or Office 365 backend or any of the other major email platforms. Typically in the business setting, Office 365 is pretty up there. Coming in at close second is definitely going to be the business Gmail accounts, so I did want to make sure to mention both of those. So how does an email investigation relate to like digital forensics, computer forensics investigation? Well, they're similar. There are different types, but the goals are the same. Typically, who's doing something behind an event? Collect the evidence, analyze, present, build a case, report to the appropriate governing authority, or whichever authority is granting the access. So again, if it's a corporate or private sector, if it's public sector, there's going to be a initiating body that controls the investigation. So an email investigation is going to be authorized by the appropriate parties before the investigator dives into it. The big thing with our email investigation is understand privacy laws. Understand the jurisdiction granted to you by the appropriate governing body. There are two big ones that you need to look at: the Electronic Communication Privacy Act, ECPA, and the Stored Communications Act. Both very specifically apply to email. So why is jurisdiction important? That's because email crime depends on where you're at. The country, the location, the state, the city. Spam may not be a crime in some areas, in some countries, in some states. So always consult the appropriate work group, normally general counsel, while dealing with email. Examples of crime could be drug trafficking, could be murder for hire, could be fraud, stalking, child pornography, terrorism, extortion, and that's just a small list. There's also the thing called forensics linguistics, and that's where language and the law both intersect. So there's four main categories: language and law, language in the legal process, language in evidence, and research and teaching. So part of this will encompass civil cases, criminal cases, cyber terrorist cases, and other legal proceedings. Essentially, we are looking at the language and how that intersects with a legal component. For example, in some countries, hate speech is illegal. So making a social media post saying a very specific phrase might be classified as hate speech, and so there is now an investigation off of social media based off of a post that a person put online. If that post was illegal in that country, that person could be going to prison because of a post they put on social media. And again, that's specific to certain countries where language or certain forms of language are not legal. So how to examine email? Well, you need access to the victim's device. Using the victim's email client, you can find copies and potential evidence in email form. Now, that's not saying that you will find email. That just means that you potentially could find. You can access protected or encrypted material via the email client as well, because normally people that are doing more nefarious things via email also set up email encryption. So being able to access it from the victim's device should already have the encryption or de-encryption key present. So guide the victim on the phone, open the appropriate email, look at the header portion of any email. You may also need to recover any of the deleted emails or emails that are moved to like the trash bin. Copying an email message normally is one of the first things you want to do. Emails, once you get in them, can be modified, so we have to be careful here. So before you start an email investigation, you should have a copy and print the emails that are involved in the crime or the violation. That way you know kind of what you are going after. You might also want to forward the messages as attachments to another email address. That one I would be extremely careful with, because that means you're manipulating the contents, and that may or may not be allowed. You want to contact the team, your organizational policies, before doing any of that. A lot of email have a GUI component. You can copy emails by dragging it out of the email client for long-term storage. You can also use this process to save emails in a different location. So we keep saying things like view the header. So the investigator should know how to view the email header, whether it's a GUI or web-based client. Outlook is a very common desktop email application, or Mail, depending on if you have a Mac or a Windows machine. Both of them have the ability to view the header. And again, we're going to look at the header in the lab portion of this video. But again, the big thing is understand how to view that header. So after you open the email header, you can copy the contents and paste it into a text document. That way you can read and you can actually filter or search for key phrases. So you need to become familiar with as many email programs as possible. And again, that's really unrealistic. If you do email investigations for corporations, you're going to know the email application that the corporation uses. You're not going to know all the email applications out there because that's just not really realistic. So I keep saying things like Outlook. So to do this in Outlook, you double click the message, you can click on File and Properties, and from there you can view the header. You would copy the header to any text document, and you'd want to save it as something a little bit more relevant than header.txt. You want some context so that as you analyze these, you might be able to save them as separate artifacts. So you might have your original email and you might have the header of that email. That way, it's there for your documentation purposes. When you look at the properties, the bottom part, it will say Internet Header. And here's a perfect example. Let me grab my pen. So this, and you'll notice there's a scroll bar. So there's a lot of contents there, and it will outline who it was received from. It will outline the encryption. It will outline very specific details about how the message went through the email system. If we are talking Gmail, if we're talking Yahoo, the same thing. Gmail, you would go down to the circular arrow, show the original. You could download the original, and you can also then view the header. Yahoo, the same thing. And these are general steps because as these tools are developed, they also then get updated. This is a much longer view of an email header, but this is from Yahoo. So why is this important? Headers, one, allow you to verify the legitimacy or the credibility of the email. The main purpose of this is so that you can look at the IP addresses, the originating addresses, so that you can track them down. You can double check dates and times of the messages, as well as file names and the attachments, and if there's any unique identifiers in the message. A huge part of this is so that you can double check to make sure that the email is legitimate, that the email was sent, or where it was sent from. Now, keep in mind the contents of the email aren't what we are looking at. We are looking at, did the email actually get sent? Was there an originating IP address? If it says it came from Gmail, did it originate from a Gmail IP address? We're not looking at the contents of the email just yet. We're looking at the technical information about routing the email from the server to the client. So let's look at that again. So here we see our email header moved over to a text document, and then we can start organizing it. We can see when it was received. We can see by which domain, which IP address, which map ID, things of that nature. That way that all of that aids in our investigation. So email messages are saved on the client side, or they're either left as a copy on the server. Microsoft Outlook saves everything as a OST file. You can export or archive them to a PST, but again, that's just the mail database that Outlook uses. Most email programs will also include some type of electronic message or address book, calendar, task lists, memos, and so forth. It doesn't matter if you're using a desktop app or a web app. These are common features in almost every email system. In web-based email, messages are displayed and saved as web contents in the browser's cache. So many web-based email are going to be treated more like a browser, and they can also offer both instant messaging and other features depending on the email service that you have. So tracing an email, this is where this is becoming more important. To determine the message origin is called tracing. You can contact the appropriate responding server if you know it came from a Gmail server. You reach out to Google. If you know it came from an Office 365 system, you contact Office 365. And again, they may or may not help you based off of the information that you provide. If you want to access someone else's email system and this is now dealing with a public sector granting authority, well, they're going to ask for a warrant. If you are dealing with a private email system hosted through Office 365, you're probably not going to get it. You can also look at registry sites to get detailed information from the individual domains. So if you're looking at csn.edu, you can look up the name registrar to see who the administrative contact is for that specific domain. I also know that that email domain is hosted on Office 365 and it is a public institution, so trying to gain access to any detailed information about them other than the name registrar is going to be kept private unless there is a warrant involved. So moving on, how do we look at email logs? Well, there are plenty of devices, part of the infrastructure, that are going to have logs. The server that hosts the email, there's going to be logs there. The router, the firewalls, the switches, all are going to have logs that might be associated with what you are trying to accomplish. So the router is going to be incoming and outgoing traffic, the rules that are applied. The firewall might be filtering email traffic or filtering IP addresses. So these are all going to be up for grabs when we're talking about log analysis. You can use a text editor or any specialized tool for log analysis to review that content. Here's an example of the Microsoft Windows Firewall, and these are going to be the allowed, because they're all green, inbound or outbound based rules, because you can have logs coming into the server or going out of the server, and you can filter based off of your requirements. An email server is loaded with specific software to handle email, to use email protocols. In the Microsoft realm, that's called Microsoft Exchange. That is going to be the application that is used to both send and receive email for a specific registered domain. The email system is going to have logs for just about everything. It's going to have a database for each mail message and for all mail boxes, and it's going to have a very similar flat file system, and that's very subjective depending on the mail client that you have, for organizing the data. Normally, each mail box will have an individual mail client or user attached to it. Not always the case, but that's the pretty common layout. Each mailbox is going to have messages that will correlate to that individual mailbox. So each of the emails that a system or a platform gets will go into a massive database. Each message is then going to be linked to a mailbox. That way, when you go, oh, I want to see everything attached to this mailbox, it will query the database and it will pull the messages that are attached to that mailbox. So you'll notice that the infrastructure does have a lot of logs. The email specifically logs are going to look at email messages, accounts, sending and receiving IPs, read and receiving dates and timestamps, content, and other system-specific information. So when we are working with an email investigation, looking at the potential sender's domain name and reaching out to their administrator to gather additional details is possible. Servers can also recover deleted emails similar to deleted files. Not just that, just because an end user deletes something doesn't mean that the email server deletes them, because there are compliance settings, there are email deletion settings on the server side that might prevent a user from deleting these settings. But keep in mind, this is not just a Microsoft world. There are Linux variations. So common UNIX email systems use postfix and sendmail. So these are storing information in configuration files in the etc or etc folder, both sendmail.cf or syslog.config. This will specify the log files that are needed for that Unix-based email system. Postfix also has two configuration files, master.cf and main.cf. Both of them are found under the etc postfix file. There are log files on Unix as well, all for SMTP, sending emails, and for the receiving connectors, both POP and IMAP. So those are stored in the var log mellog location. The default location for storing log files on a Unix-based system is var log, and an administrator can definitely change this if they want. So you can use the find or locate command to modify or to search for files. Find or locator for searching. I was just meaning that you can modify where these log files are, so using the find and locate become that much more important. So looking back at the Microsoft realm, again, Microsoft uses Exchange. It's based off of the Microsoft Extensible Storage Engine, the ESE-based engine. Most useful file to investigate are the database files and the checkpoint files and the log files. Not listed here, but those are things that I've noticed when I've done my investigations. The database and log files are what I look at the most. Information stored in the database files are a EDB-based file, and that's responsible for the IMAP. The funny part here is this is also assuming you have a local exchange. If you have a hosted based exchange through Microsoft, they have a web front end tool for compliance and investigation. Again, there are log files, the transactional logs, that will keep track of all the changes to the data. That's a good log to review, but this is something that is going to take time. These investigations are not small investigations. The checkpoints, these are marks that point the last time which the database was written to a disk. And there's also temporary files, and that's to help prevent loss if a server is busy converting binary data to readable text. So the temporary files do have a role here, but again, it really just depends on the physical media that you're working with. To retrieve log files created by Exchange, you can do it through PowerShell. You can do a get transactional log. You can also do a tracking log on the Exchange server directly. You can view them through a local event viewer as well. But again, this really all depends on, do you have access to the Exchange? Is it hosted or is it on site? Because that dictates how the investigation goes. You will have specialized forensics tools for email investigations. And again, a lot of these are going to be based off of when you're doing them, because every year tools get outdated. Every few months these tools get outdated. So you're going to be looking at which tool operates within the environment you are working with. I use Access Data FTK for Outlook, pretty common, but I have noticed that more recent versions of Office and Access Data don't always go very well. They've fixed it in a more recent patch, but again, that's what I mean is you are looking at what tools, and you're going to be updating the tools as necessary. We also have specialized tools. MX Toolbox for decoding email headers. That's actually a really common tool that I use. We also have a header viewer, and again, you can find which are the most appropriate based off of the current year and the product you're looking at. You're also going to be looking at tools that look at email databases. Converting an OST to a PST, that's a tool. If you only have a victims or perpetrators or suspects OST file, opening and getting it to work isn't as easy as just attaching it to a Outlook. You may actually have to have a tool to mount it, or you may have a tool to actually export it or convert it to a PST. You also might need tools for viewing the individual emails without attachment and logs. Advantages of using these tools are you don't need to know how the email server and client works if you just want to extract content from the email client. If you are having to work with an email client that connects to multiple servers, this increases the complexity, so there adds in some challenges. The big thing is understand that when you are looking at logs, you need to verify. You need to verify accounts, IDs, IP addresses, dates, and times. You want to make sure that the emails that you're reviewing or investigating are legitimate and there's a trustworthiness to them. And you do that by comparing content. With some tools, you can scan email database files on a suspect's computer to locate any emails that the suspect may have deleted. And again, that's a specialty tool. We have Magnet that also has additional modules for processing and examining. And in our book, we actually use this. Here's a screenshot of Magnet to investigate a email file. And again, this is going to be looking at and ingesting content for review. We also have our true hex editor for carving emails. So very few vendors will have the product for analyzing emails other than Microsoft, but there are things that are out there. Inbox does store emails as plain text files. We also have MIME, which is a specific format used by vendor to based off a vendor. This is basically a unique email file system that platforms use. Microsoft uses a PST and OST, but other vendors might use other formats. You can also carve emails if you have the data file. Here we have the hex, and you can carve out the contents as necessary. And you can, again, look at it through a hex editor, and you can display portions of the email. You can capture and export it to a notepad to review in further details. The nice thing is, Outlook is probably the most widely used business email application. So there's a lot of recovery tools built for this. So as an examiner, if you're recovering emails from Outlook, you're looking at an OST. So you may have to reconstruct the file or messages from the OST. PST was the old way of storing, and it's used for archiving. But if you're dealing with an active mailbox, there's OSTs now. So many advanced forensics tools will detect deleted contents within the PST, or will detect deleted PSTs and OSTs that have been either partially or completely removed. So scan PST or scan OST are built-in, not built-in tools, but tools that you can download that can actually scan for OST and PST files. It does come with Microsoft Office, but there are add-ons that you can download. Scan PST does both OST and PST, but Scan OST has specific tools for OST, and it doesn't work well with a PST file. There are guidance softwares as well as, again, plugins for looking through Outlook emails through variations. Again, this is looking at email Outlook 2013, 9 years old. That doesn't work any well. So you're going to be looking for current up-to-date tools. A very old example is the Enron case. Has more than, it's supposed to be 10,000, not 1,000 emails, and that contained personal information. credit cards, socials, birth dates, and other PII or medical. So email actually has a lot of sensitive information, and not a lot of companies actually bother to enforce email policies the way that they should. For medical facilities, there are ways to auto-encrypt emails that have medical data. It's there. Most people don't use it. Most people don't know how to use it. So applying digital forensics to social media, also known as online social networks. Again, this is a very, very, very brief overview. Social media can have cyberbullying, could be against company policy, could have leaked intellectual property. It also could be looking at who's posting content. It could also be employees posting on their private social media wearing company logos that then leads to the individual being terminated because they're representing the company in a way that doesn't align with the company's policies. Social media often has a substantial party claim. Social media does involve multiple jurisdictions, and it is global. So warrants and subpoenas are definitely necessary when viewing social media servers. And again, all of this is going to be outlined in a different set of videos coming up, because social media is not a 3-slide type thing. It is its own course. Email is its own course. So we're just doing high-level overviews. Social media also is attached to mobile devices. So most people are not using social media on their desktops or laptops. They're now moved to some social media apps on mobile-based devices. Whether it's iPhone or Android, all of this is stored as data on the devices. So the investigation needs to move to those devices. There's not a lot of software tools out there currently developed for social media investigations. However, social media investigations have drastically been increasing, and so has the training, and thus so have the tools. Alright, that is it for this course. We talked specifically about email, kind of how email works, how email investigations are related to other forms of digital forensics. We looked at the programs, we looked at the email abuse, as well as looking at the header information, looking at header, file, logs. We wrapped up with email applications, and we looked at social media in a very high level overview. And again, we wrapped it up with social media forensics tools are being evolved, and they're growing every day actually. But there are tools that are specifically built for social media forensics. Alright, that is it for this chapter. Questions or concerns, please let me know. Alright, now that we've wrapped up some of the material for this chapter, are there any questions? There's a lot of different material covered, so again, the key thing is, as you're going through the material, whether it be the reading, whether it be the videos, ask questions, write questions down. The more that you can engage your brain in this material, the better you are at retaining the information. So again, questions, please feel free to reach out, and we will go from there. Thank you, and I look forward to working with you throughout the remainder of these modules.